Like many of you, I adore the film The Goonies. Like many of you, I was absolutely terrified of Mama Fratelli as a youngster, played by the late Anne Ramsey. Hers is an incredible story. Just a short time after she'd finished shooting The Goonies, she had to have part of her tongue taken out. Join me as I salute Anne Ramsey, a proper 80s movie hero.
Stories. We would be honoured if you would join us.
Now, often when we're talking about movies of the 80s, we're talking about the Stallones, the Schwarzeneggers, even people like Michael J. Fox, Harrison Ford. But there are character actors throughout that period that really, really made one hell of an impact. For me, none more so, really, than Anne Ramsey. Hardly a household name, but you would recognise her face if you were watching movies in my era, and you might just recognise her voice as well. Now, Anne Ramsey sprung to real worldwide fame, I'd suggest, off the back of The Goonies. But her career inevitably went back a little bit further than that. That she started acting in 1971 in a film called The Sporting Club. Now, she appeared in that with the man she married, Logan Ramsey. They appeared together in several films. And you go through her 1970s filmography, and there's some like decent films in there. I mean, Fun with Dick and Jane, the original version of it, where she played employment applicant. But there's nothing really that massively stands out. She would move into the 80s, appearing in the not very good Clint Eastwood sequel, Any Which Way You Can. National Lampoon's Class Reunion. I mean, it's not a list that particularly stands out, really. But there's little to suggest from that list that the impact she would have on 1980s movies with a collection of character roles that are just ingrained on some people's heads. The turning point was a then upcoming movie by the name of The Goonies. This was a real, she was in her 50s at this point when she got the film that would transform her recognition, really. Now, Steven Spielberg was going to produce this. Richard Donner was signed up to direct. And as you more than likely know, The Goonies, great score, Dave Grusin, follows a bunch of youngsters, and they're looking for they're following an old treasure map in the hope of finding the money to save their house. And along the way, they come up against this criminal gang, the Fratellis, a terrifying criminal gang. The 80s is not short of terrifying things in supposed family movies. The end of Superman 3, no spoiler there. All of Return to Oz. The Never-Ending Story has its moments as well, doesn't it? Particularly, you know the bit. So, but the key villain of The Goonies, the lost Bond villain, really, is the fearsome Mama Fratelli. And Anne Ramsey gets cast in this role by Spielberg and Donner, and she set about making it as memorable as she could. The Goonies is primarily a young ensemble cast driving the film, and several of that young ensemble have admitted to being terrified of her on set. In particular, Jeff Cohen, who plays Chunk, now a lawyer, and Richard Donner's insistence as well. She wasn't averse to giving her screen son in the film, Robert Davi, talking of Bond villains, License to Kill, well, giving him a slap to provoke a reaction. It was the 80s, folks. People did things like that then. So on set, she was making an impact. Before the camera, she was making an impact. And she'd battled really hard to get to this point in her career. She'd been married to Logan Ramsey, and happily married. And it was quite telling. Between the two of them, they appeared in this whole bunch of films. And this fearsome reputation that the Goonies cast, this kind of... I know John's going to edit this beautifully for me. Thanks, John. This kind of... What's the word I'm looking for? The fear that the Goonies cast held for her. I mean, it's quite telling that a couple of years afterwards, she was still in touch with Jeff Cohen, and he would say, he was in touch with her husband as well, and he insisted that Anne is always playing these tough guys, but she and Logan are really nice, and described them as party animals. But there's no way around it. The Goonies made her feared by young fans. And also, it brought her this bright spot of fame that she'd not really had in her acting career to that point. And the tragedy is she just wouldn't get an awful lot of time to enjoy it, because during the production of The Goonies, she'd been suffering from a sore throat and was scared to go to a doctor to get it checked out, especially so when she then noticed a lump in her throat. But once the Goonies had wrapped, it was her husband who insisted she had to go and get it checked out. And she got a diagnosis of throat cancer. So she recorded this role while basically suffering from this lump in her throat as the cancer in her throat was growing. Now, at first, this was treated with radiation, and she was able to carry on working. But it was then clear fairly quickly that something more drastic was going to be needed, that she was going to require surgery. So, on her 57th birthday, and Anne Ramsey was born in 1929. So this would be 1986, if my maths is working. On her 57th birthday, she had an 8-hour operation. Now, this involved taking tissue from her thigh to reconstruct the part of her tongue that needed to be removed. And it was an operation fraught with risk. Not least, there was no certainty she'd be able to get her speech back once the operation was complete. However, in the short term, it was a success. That the cancer was managed. She got her speech, and she would have some mild shoulder pain, and she would have mild drooling, and now she would speak with something of a slur. But she turned that to her advantage, because while she was going through that, Danny DeVito was planning on making the jump to directing movies, and he had this project, a film called Throw Momma from the Train. Now, he was going to star in it. That helped bring the money together. But he needed a mama. He needed someone to take on the mama role in the film. And as Danny DeVito would tell People magazine around the time, he said, I was at my wit's end, and he was going through this exhaustive casting search, wasn't able to find the performer he needed. And he said it gotten so bad that people were beginning to recommend their own mothers. And I was starting to check them out in a kind of seeing if they were suitable for the role kind of way. But it was one of his casting team who just, why don't you take a look at Anne Ramsey? And it was a eureka moment for the casting. It was a eureka moment for Throw Momma from the Train as well. And as DeVito said, I knew immediately that Momma had walked into my life. Now, Anne Ramsey would film this role in the aftermath of her surgery. So she was still dealing with the impact of that and getting used to it. And it was a struggle. And oftentimes she was said to be in intense pain throughout the shoot. But she also needed further oral surgery while filming was going on. Yet she didn't ask for a day off. And the slurred speech that she was getting used to in real life became a part of the character she played on screen. Now, Throw Momma from the Train is a really good film, and her performance is it. If you've only seen her in the Goonies, do check out Throw Momma from the Train. It's a superb performance. And she's only on screen for around 10 minutes in the movie. But you remember when Shakespeare in Love came out and Judi Dench wins Best Supporting Actor? She's only on screen for 5, 6, 7 minutes, something like that. But such is the impact of her time on screen. Anne Ramsey sort of beat her to it, really, because she's the title character, effectively, in the movie. She's not on screen for long at all, but the impact of her is off the chart. So the movie comes out 11th of December 1987, and it's a hit. It launches Danny DeVito's directorial career. He'd be off making things like Hoffa. Remember that? Hoffa going up against A Few Good Men, 2 Jack Nicholson films in the same Christmas period. He would do the first Matilda movie as well, amongst a bunch of other stuff that he directed. But also, Anne Ramsey got her sole Oscar nomination for Throw Momma from the Train. She appeared in a hit movie, was nominated for an Academy Award, and just the sheer acceptance of that just meant the world to her. Here's a woman born March 1929 in Omaha, Nebraska. She's not in the epicenter of Hollywood or anything like that. And here she is. She's built her career. In her 50s, she gets to the point where she finds her fame. She gets her Oscar nomination. And apparently it meant the absolute world to her. And she kept making, after Throw Momma from the Train, she appears in a bunch of films, the highest profile of which is she has effectively a cameo in Scrooged, reuniting her with Richard Donner, Goonies director. But she's in stuff like Dr. Hackenstein, Meet the Hollowheads, Another Chance, Homer and Eddie. She appeared in the Whoopi Goldberg film, that is, isn't it? And then she records a role in the TV show Alf, but she wouldn't get to see much of that. So Scrooged, it was Bill Murray who really wanted her involved in the movie, and she was on people's radar. They wanted to cast her. But by the time Scrooged made it into cinemas at the end of 1988, Anne Ramsey had passed just a year after the release of Throw Momma from the Train. And it was just after the Academy Awards that she suffered a recurrence of her cancer. And while she kept working for as long as she could, this time there was nothing that could be done. Anne Ramsey died on August the 11th, 1988. She was just 59 years old. She just found fame. She just got her first Oscar nomination. It could and should have been a springboard to the next level of her career. What a lovely story as well. At a point where Hollywood was not particularly inclined to cast women in their 50s in decent roles. Here's a woman who's built her career. Her career has ignited in her 50s. And I'm still talking about her, 40 years on? So she was remembered by family and friends as just basically the opposite. You read the tributes to her, just the opposite of the fierce characters that she'd become known for on screen. She was active with charity work. She was regarded as this kind and gentle person. And just this actor who worked all her life and then got to see that little bit of limelight just before her time was up. The Goonies was released over 40 years ago from when I'm talking now, and it's still in cinemas, and I hope Anne Ramsey would have loved it. I didn't know her. I've got no link to her or her family. Her work and her performances are just indelibly etched in my head, and I love the fact that you can still see her, one of the most terrifying villains of 1980s mainstream cinema. You can still see her on the big screen. Every year, there's a screening of the Goonies somewhere on the big screen. Lots of them as well. It's really sad that we didn't get more of her performances. If you take nothing from this and you've only seen the Goonies, do check out Throw Momma from the Train as well. She is a woman who, with the screen time she was given, gave us a couple of absolutely flat-out memorable characters. And boy, is she missed. Still scared of her in Goonies as well.